campus. I'm Dr. Samuelson, and I teach a number of courses here at Albright College, one of which is a botany class, and botany studies plants. And so today we're going to look at a couple trees on campus and talk about them. And the tree that's in front of you right here, as you can see, is in the process of changing color. The leaves are normally green in color, and now they're changing to reds and even some yellows that are in there as well. And the reason they change color is because they're showing pigments underneath that are normally hidden. And some of you may know about photosynthesis, and that's where plants make their own food, right, from light and from other molecules. And they use a pigment called chlorophyll, and that's what gives the green color to the trees. Because you can still see, if you look over there, there's some trees that are still green in color right now. They haven't started to change color. And that green color covers over these other colors. And trees are great recyclers. They started recycling even before we ever did it. So instead of collecting cans, they are saving certain molecules for themselves. And one of those is nitrogen. Nitrogen is really important for plants for them to grow. Turns out that chlorophyll, that green chlorophyll, has lots of nitrogen in it. And so what they do is they break down that chlorophyll. And when they do that, the beautiful colors show up that we see in some of these leaves. So we can start to see the reds and the yellows that are normally not visible. This tree happens to be a maple tree. So this leaf has sort of a characteristic shape to it. Some maples have even a more distinct leaf, and maybe we'll see some of those later. But if you've studied, or if you've gone to Canada or seen the Canadian flag, you know that there's a maple leaf on their flag. There's also the Maple Leafs, the hockey team as well. So that leaf is a pretty iconic kind of shape to it. And these maple trees are used, you probably know, to make things like maple syrup, right? It takes about 40 gallons of sap from these trees boiled down to give you 1 gallon of maple syrup. They also have a really nice wood. If you've ever gone bowling, a lot of the bowling alleys have maple wood and them as well. Now these trees are dropping their leaves right now, so they're starting to fall on the ground, and there's a term for that. It's called deciduous, as opposed to trees like the one over here that is evergreen, and it has needles on it, and it keeps those needles for most of the year, throughout the entire year as well. Why do you think these trees drop their leaves like this? You guys are probably too young, but your parents and maybe some of your teachers will remember that several Halloweens ago, we had a freak snowstorm. And that snowstorm ripped the branches off the trees because they hadn't dropped their leaves yet. And that caused a lot of power outages, unfortunately. We were without power for a week at my house because of that. And so these drop their leaves so that when the snow falls, it doesn't rip the branches off the trees. Now, a tree with needles, like the hemlock that we see across the way, is one that can shed that snowfall and not allow the branches to fall off the trees. So you'll see that plants up north, like in Alaska, Canada, places like that, could typically have just needles on them. So these are dropping their leaves right now, and pretty soon the tree will be without leaves altogether. There's one over there that we can see that has dropped just about all its leaves at this point. And so if we get a snowfall, it's not going to lose its branches. Let's just look real quick at this tree over here. This is, I mentioned the eastern hemlock. And if you look closely, you can see that there are cones on that. So these are called conifers, and they produce little cones. So pine trees will produce cones like that as well. And this happens to be Pennsylvania's state tree as well. That maple tree that we just saw has single leaves like this, and we call these simple leaves. The tree over here is a Buckeye, and it has leaves that look like this. And you might be fooled into thinking that this is many leaves, right? Because it looks like it has about 5 or 6 little leaflets on there. However, this actually is one leaf. So this is considered a compound leaf. And the way you can tell a simple leaf from a compound leaf is where it attaches to the stem, there's a little bud there. And we can't get up to the branches right here to see that. But if I were able to pull down a branch, I would see a little bud at the base of it. Likewise, with those simple leaves that I just have down here, On the tree, we would see a little bud at the base of that. So this is a simple leaf, and this is a compound leaf. And we'll take a look at another tree that has a different type of compound leaf in just a minute. But right now, let's look at the tree that's back behind us over here. And this is a very interesting tree that doesn't come from Pennsylvania. This particular tree comes from China, and it has a fan-shaped leaf. And you see some of these around in Reading. They're planted all over the place because they do really well in cities. But this is a living fossil. This is called the ginkgo tree. And years ago, botanists thought that these were all extinct. They found fossils of these leaves in the rocks, and they just assumed that these were dead, that we're not living organisms. However, when they went to visit China, they went to a temple there back in like the 1950s and saw these trees there. And the Chinese allowed us to take some seeds from those, and those plants then were planted all over the world. Another tree that we often see in our woods is the hickory tree. And this particular tree also has compound leaves. So there's, in this case, there's 5 leaflets that make this up, and they're in a different arrangement than the Buckeye that we saw before. And if you look at the bark on the tree, look how shaggy that bark is. So the name of this tree is a shagbark hickory, and we can find these in the woods, and they make some nice nuts that certain animals like to eat. I have a couple in my hand here. You can kind of see these. Here's maybe a better one. You can see what these look like. They usually have a husk on the outside of them, and the squirrels have already found the nuts inside of those and made a meal out of those. But this is a common tree that we find in our forest. Unlike the ginkgo that we just looked at, which is not a native plant, this is a native tree in our forest. And it's a bright yellow now because the chlorophyll is breaking down, and we can see the yellow pigments showing through. Here is a tree called a beech tree that we have on campus, and look at the bark. This always reminds me of an elephant. When I looked at it, it looks like the legs of an elephant. It has that gray color, real smooth bark. This is also one that's native in our forest and provides a lot of food for squirrels and chipmunks, things like that. So they're called beech nuts that these produce, and the bark is really distinctive. You can always pick these out when you're walking through the woods, and they get to be rather large in diameter. This particular one is actually not a native one. This is a European beech, but they look very similar to the beech trees that we have in our forest. And you can see they have simple leaves. This one hasn't really changed color much at all. Here's one of the coverings over the nuts. I can't find any of the nuts right now. The squirrels beat me to it. We've been talking about trees, but also in the forest there are understory plants that are shorter than trees, and one of them is a shrub like this one here. And this is a native plant called a dogwood, and it's one that we find in our woods, and it gets pretty colors in the fall, and then in the spring it gets some nice white flowers on it as well. And so we have, the canopy is made of the larger trees, and then you have a smaller set of trees called shrubs. And then on the forest floor, you have really small plants like native flowers and things like that that are going to be found at the floor. When we were walking across campus, I happened upon another maple leaf, and this is the one that you sort of often will see on the flag. There's the back side of it in the front that you would see on the Canadian flag, and this is what people typically think of when they think of maple trees. So they have different forms of leaves, but this is kind of the classic look of a maple leaf. Now we have in front of us another important tree that we find up on Mount Penn and a lot of our local places, and that is an oak tree. And there's 2 main kinds of oaks. And if you look at this one, look at the leaves and how rounded they are on the edges. You see that? And this comes from a white oak. You can see how white the bark is on the trunk, and that's one type of oak that we find in our forest. And the other kind that we typically find, I have a leaf from it, and this is the red oak. And notice how with the red oaks, they're much more pointy on the margins of the leaves. And there are a number of members of the red oak family and a number of members of the white oak family. Both of them will produce acorns, which are going to be really important for things like squirrels. But you don't just think about squirrels and chipmunks. Think about things like wild turkeys and deer. They make use of the acorns as well. And it's said that the white oak acorns are much less bitter than the red oak ones. And Native Americans made use of these. They would grind them into flour. One of the bitter components that we find in these trees is called a tannin. Remember, you've heard about tanning hides, things like that the old pioneers used to do. And they would use tannins for that process of tanning hides. And a lot of them can be extracted from these trees. But having fewer tannins makes them more appetizing to eat. And so the white oak acorns are a lot more easy to make use of in terms of making acorn flour and things of that sort. Other things that oaks are good for, again, they make a very strong wood. So it's a hardwood that is used in a lot of furniture and things like that. So our early pioneers used it, and we still use it today for making furniture. So birches are another important tree that we find in our forest, and we have here in front of us a river birch. And notice how the bark peels off of these, and it has this sort of orange color to it. There are other kind of birches, one that's called a black birch, or the other one's also called a cherry birch. And these we can find up on Mount Penn. And if you break a branch, it smells a little like wintergreen in smell. And you can extract syrup, you can extract the sap from those and make it into birch beer. So this particular birch doesn't work well for birch beer, but the cherry birch is a good one for making that birch beer. If you've ever gone to the Kutztown Festival, there's some Amish there, and they have these birch branches there, and they'll put it into a device that will extract that sap from the branches, and that's used to flavor then birch beer. So yet again, another important native plant that we can see in our landscape. And I keep mentioning native versus non-native. Like the ginkgo is not native to our area here. And why is it important to plant native plants in your yard? One of the main reasons is because they are going to be food for caterpillars. And you may wonder why, well, what good are caterpillars? Caterpillars are food for lots of birds. And our birds have been really suffering from, a lot of them are going extinct, largely because of habitat loss and also loss of their food source. So having these caterpillars around, especially on oak trees, they're really a good source for caterpillar food. They in turn are food for the birds. So you can think of native plants as being baby food for keeping other animals alive. Another native tree is the sweet gum, and notice how they have these sort of star-like leaves on it, and you can see one shown here, and you will also see it when we pan up to the tree. They also have an interesting fruit that looks like this. You may not think of this as fruit, but it's a dry fruit, and each of these, they almost look like little beaks that are open there. They drop out seeds, and so it's a way that it spreads itself around, and also animals can make use of those seeds as well. So they sometimes call these gum balls, and if you have this near a sidewalk, you could take a ride on those if you're not careful. But you can see how the tree is loaded down with these fruits on it that are ripening and eventually releasing their seeds. Another common tree that we can find in our forest is the black walnut. And once again, it has a compound leaf made of many leaflets. It looks a little like a feather. It's missing a few of its leaflets on there. But again, you would find at the bottom of that a single bud, which tells me that's a compound leaf. And these produce a fruit that looks like this. They're usually kind of green. Now it's starting to kind of fall apart and turn black. But then inside of that is a nut. And again, animals can make use of those nuts. We like to eat walnuts as well. And so you can see that these make a really nice wood, sort of a brownish to black wood that's part of our hardwoods that we can use for making furniture, things like that. So this one has lost most of its leaves by now, but again, there's a squirrel up there, another squirrel on the end of the branch. This is a Norway maple, and it makes lots and lots of seeds. So you can see these, and sometimes you know these as helicopters. They kind of fly like a helicopter a little bit in the wind, and they have a classic maple leaf kind of look to them. And you can see all the fruits up there, all those seeds that are on the tree itself. Now this is a non-native tree, and it comes from Scandinavia. That's why it's called a Norway maple. And unfortunately, these are not great to have in your landscape, because they will grow and outcompete other plants in the woods. And so they're kind of a bad tree. You don't want to put these in your yard, because if their seeds blow up onto Mount Penn, then you can get seedlings that grow there in the shade, and they shade out other plants, and they will eventually force them out of the woods. And these are not good for caterpillars, and these don't make good baby food for birds, because a lot of the caterpillars don't eat these trees. And so that's one of the reasons why we want to try to keep native plants in our yards, so that the animals are happy as well. So here we have an American beech. Remember we saw the European beech. It looked like a elephant legs there, and this will eventually look like that, but this is the true version that we have here in the United States. It does have the gray bark that you can see down there. We planted this about 10 years ago, and it's growing slowly, but it's going to take a long time to get to be as big as those trees we saw before. So you can buy these at native plant places and put them in your yard, so that you can have them as a native plant in your backyard. I know I've planted a number of oak trees in my yard to help support the caterpillars that the birds like to eat. And you can see on this how pointy the buds are. Look at how pointy those are. That's one of the things that you see on the beech tree. And this is in the process of losing its leaves. And then those buds will become the leaves next year. When the new growth starts again in the spring, they'll come out of those buds. They actually improve the value of your house, and they also provide that sort of natural shade and natural heating in the summer, and heating in the winter when the leaves drop off the